Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the 1991 Matawan mayoral debate. The intended format of these proceedings was that we would ask each of the three candidates for mayor questions on the important issues facing Matawan in the next 4 years. With this in mind, an invitation was sent to each of the candidates for this station and by certified mail. Unfortunately, Mr. Kidsis declined the invitation to debate, and Mr. Armellino failed to respond or acknowledge the invitation. I therefore present Mayor Bob Shuey. Mr. Shuey, what is the most important issue of this campaign?
The most important issue with taxpayers today is probably the same important issue in any other town in the northeastern part of the United States, and that's taxes. I'd like to take you through a little history of what has happened in the past 4 years during my term as mayor. When I took over the job as mayor, there had been a reevaluation company from Hudson County, New York, hired by former Mayor Vic Armellino. That company, as many of us remember, came in your house. In some cases, they didn't come in your house. They looked at your property, they assessed that house, placed a value on it. In many cases, what that house would have brought, I think, in Hudson County, not here in Matawan Borough. So we all know what happened with the reevaluation. During the next 2 years, there was over 500 tax appeals filed by residents in this town. That's over 20% of the entire population of the town. The cost of that reevaluation was $250,000, $250,000. During this time, we've had to defend appeals that we know are not correct. We know that people's houses that are assessed at $200,000 cannot bring $200,000 on the market. So I have pushed for and finally succeeded in accomplishing a task that was a reassessment of the houses in Matawan Borough. This reassessment is now complete. The list will be out shortly. The cost of this reassessment was $25,000. Pretty good bargain. The preliminary reports say that approximately 17% is what your homes were overvalued at. If you take a $200,000 assessed property in this town, your assessment should drop to now approximately $164,000, $166,000. That's a pretty good cut. More realistic and where your house should probably be. During the past year, since we had approximately 500 residents come out to a council meeting last year and scream and yell about the high taxes, I formed a committee of citizens in the borough, and I have been criticized for that committee, but I stand by it. This was a committee formed of people that were not involved in government in any way. There were not even members of the recreation department, any planning or zoning board. These were residents that were interested in their tax rate and wanted to do something to help. This committee was formed with some very intelligent people on it, and they spent day after day going through the budget of the borough. They made some recommendations to myself and to the council, and one of the recommendations was we can do better on collecting delinquent taxes. I took their recommendations last year and I put them into force. I took the month of December off from my business, and I spent the month trying to collect outstanding taxes that we've had in this borough. I did this by telephone, I did it by letters, I tried to set up time payments with people, and I'm not talking about the people in town that are on welfare, the people that may have been recently unemployed. I'm talking about the continual, habitual, delinquent taxpayers that year after year head that list. Some of these people are the Millbrook Diner, who owed us $35,000 and was on the list every year. Armellino's Town Tavern, which has topped the list for 4 consecutive years. Now I've been chastised by my opponent for going after these taxpayers and threatening to close their businesses down. Well, because I did that, and because they paid their taxes, 3 cents out of the 11-cent reduction in your taxes this year was a reality. Because of these delinquent taxpayers being forced to pay their tax bills, you saved 3 cents on your total tax bill per $100. The reduction in taxes this year was accomplished to the tune of 20%. If you take your tax bill, which I hope you will at the end of this show tonight, take last year's tax bill and take this year's tax bill. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 4 individual items of taxation. The first is the county tax, the second is the regional school tax, the third is the local tax, and the fourth one is the open space fund tax. If you'll notice from last year's bill to this year's bill, the county tax has stayed the same. The regional school tax has increased by 21 cents on $100. The local tax has decreased by 11 cents, as I said, from 55 to 44 cents. And the open space fund tax is virtually the same. In my house, for example, the reduction in the local tax meant $159 less this year. I will continue to go after these tax delinquents. I have already notified the Board of Health and any other agency in the borough that issues licenses that they are not to issue licenses this coming year to any business that is delinquent in taxes or water or sewer bill. I will continue in this borough. I would like at this time to introduce my 2 running mates, Mr. Jack Shepard and Mr. Kevin Mandeville. First, Mr. Jack Shepard.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Jack Shepard. I'm a Republican candidate for Borough Council this year here in Matawan. And I'd like to thank, first of all, the Mayor for having me on. And second of all, I think that as a lifelong resident of Matawan, I think I have a pulse on the needs of the town, and that's why I think that as a member of the council, I could really do a lot for Matawan. I have a problem right now because I think that as an elected councilman, someone should represent the needs of the town, and right at this particular time I think that some members of the council are misrepresenting the council. Example can be over 1,500 people of this town signed a petition to purchase the Broad Street School, and yet 3 members of the council have not even looked in depth into that particular situation. Moreover, 2 years I was a candidate, and I lost by less than a dozen votes, but yet 2 people, Mr. Kidsis, Councilman Kidsis and Councilman Thompson, ran this petition for a very sensitive issue at that particular time on Mill Road and promised to pave that road for a cost of less than $100,000. I will tell you right now that the town has had to bond over $500,000 to pave that road. I believe that that is also misrepresentation. I think that this town needs someone that can take a look into the crucial issues of the town, make a decision based on the majority, and make the hard decision for the benefit of all people of Matawan. And I would thank you for this time to let you hear my opinions, and at this time I'd like to introduce my running mate, Mr. Kevin Mandeville. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack. To the residents of Matawan Borough, I, as an elected councilman, will push for the purchase of the Broad Street School. The acquisition of the Broad Street School will have a tremendous impact in our town. There will be many organizations in our town that will benefit from the purchase of the school, and it could serve as a meeting place for all of our senior citizens in town. In addition, for too long, our youth in Matawan has been neglected. If you've ever ventured to the movie theater in Matawan, you've seen numerous kids hanging out, being chased by the police. These kids have nothing to do, nowhere to go. In the past, none of our politicians has given a damn about these kids. Kids don't vote. Why should politicians care? Well, we, the Republican Party, we give a damn. We care. The gymnasium in the school is fine. It can serve many purposes, from holding dances to having basketball games. I will explore every avenue of funding that is available for the repairs that are needed at this school. This will include federal and state grants. I've been contacted by numerous contractors and organizations who will provide their time and resources to help with the repairs that need to be done at the school.
Thank you, Kevin, and thanks, Jack. You have now seen the Republican ticket. You've heard from the three of us. I'd just like to take a moment to expand a little bit on what Kevin was talking about with the Broad Street School. The flyer that's going around town right now has some outrageous claims of dollar amounts in the excess of $2.8 million to clean up the school. I'd like to go over a couple of these points item by item. There was an environmental study done by the Board of Education. Mr. Kidds has had that environmental study, as did everybody else on the council. We knew the problems that existed at the school. We knew that the asbestos problem is there, but it's a very minor problem, and that asbestos can be cleaned up, and a process called encapsulation is what takes place. You actually wrap the asbestos up that's on pipes, and it's painted, and it's approved by the DEP, does not have to be removed. The asbestos on the floor tiles can be covered. Process was just done recently like this in Asbury Park at an old school. You put plywood on the floor over the tiles, you put carpeting over the plywood. That way when the carpeting is ripped up later on, you don't disturb the asbestos tiles on the floor. There is no asbestos in the ceiling, so the cost of removing asbestos mostly is in the old high school. To talk about the lead paint, there is lead paint on the walls in the old high school. There is no lead in the paint in the grammar school. There is no present state statute that requires the removal of lead paint. It can be covered, and that is acceptable. To talk about the oil tanks, Mr. Kidds in his flyer claims that it's going to cost up to $1 million to remove an oil tank. Mr. Kidds knows that I have read a letter at previous council meetings from a contractor whose business it is to remove oil tanks. This contractor has volunteered at no cost to the borough for labor or materials to remove the oil tank that is there. It's a 10,000 gallon heating oil tank, and it is not a tank with a major problem. We knew that. The school board hired a professional tank removal company to come in and survey the problem. Their recommendation is no necessary remedial efforts have to be taken at this time. There is also a pending piece of legislation before the state legislature that states if you have a school or a municipality, you may fill the tank and leave it in its place. So that has not been passed. It is pending. If it's passed, we won't have to remove the tank at all. So the $2.8 million that Mr. Kidds talks about can come down to almost zero. My plan is to not use the high school. It has sat vacant for 5 years. I see no problem in letting it sit vacant until we decide what we're going to do with it. If we don't do anything with it, we therefore don't have to spend any money cleaning it up. The grammar school has virtually no problems, and if you go through it, you would be amazed that you could clean that thing with a broom and probably go in and start playing basketball. It's in great condition. There are a couple of leaks in the roof. I have contractors, as Kevin has said, that have volunteered their services. I would like to leave the buildings alone if they're purchased by the borough until we can exhaust our financing supplies. I have spoken with the other councilmen. They know my position. I am not pushing to buy this school to spend $2.8 million or any $1 million of taxpayers' dollars. It took a great effort to reduce taxes 20% this year. I certainly would not go back and put a burden on the taxpayers for this project. The 11 cents that I talked about reducing the taxes this year would work out, if we purchased the school, to 0.8 tenths of 1 cent in increase next year to buy the school. There's also some other ideas that have been talked about for years to reduce the cost of the burden on the taxpayers, and that is leasing part of this space out to county or state agencies. The YMCA has indicated a willingness to come into the borough when we purchase that building and open up a facility. They would lease space. This would be money in the borough's pocket. Eventually, Borough Hall could be moved over there. If it took 10 years, it would be fine. If Borough Hall was moved to the Broad Street School site, the old Borough Hall on Main Street could be sold, and that would be an addition to the tax rolls. So I'd like to say, in closing, that you people who have tuned in tonight to this, what was supposed to be a debate, obviously have more interest and concern with the issues of the borough than the two people who are running as my opposition. I thank you for your interest and your concern. this party and this ticket is concerned about the future of this borough. Good evening.